service of the notice at the meeting, I duly appointed qualified and acting secretary of the Medford Housing Authority. We hereby certify that on April 6, 2017, I filed in the manner provided by Section 19 of Chapter 30A of the Massachusetts General Laws with the clerk of the City of Medford, Massachusetts, a notice of special meeting of the members of the Medford Housing Authority in which the foregoing is a true and correct copy, and that's signed by me on April 6, 2017.
I'll second.
Motion to approve the minutes,
Yeah, the notice.
the notice,
Both of them. Can I do that?
Yep.
Both of them.
which was made by
Just for the special.
Commissioner Luongo, seconded by Commissioner Lewis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yeah,
I
that,
don't believe you did a roll call vote.
okay.
Roll call vote then,
Roll call.
Roll call vote.
okay.
Just roll call. vote.
Commissioner Luongo,
Present.
Commissioner Lewis,
Present.
Commissioner Chevry,
Here.
and Commissioner Adria,
Here.
and Commissioner Young.
Yeah,
We do have a quorum. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to at this time read an excerpt from Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30, Section 20F. And it reads as follows. After notifying the chair of a public body, any person may make a video or audio recording of an open session of a meeting of a public body or may transmit the meeting through any medium, subject to reasonable requirements of the chair as to the number, placement, and operation of equipment used so as not to interfere with the conduct of the meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, the chair shall inform other attendees of such recording. And I did receive an email this morning, it was sent late Friday afternoon or early evening, and it is addressed to the Medford Housing Authority, to whom it may concern. It came to my email as the acting executive director from Mr. Joe Viglione, and it states, I intend to videotape and or Facebook Live the next meeting of the Medford Housing Authority if I'm available, 5 p.m. Monday, April 10th. So with that, Mr. Chairman, it would be appropriate to officially notify the attendees of the meeting that that this meeting may be videotaped and recorded or broadcast.
okay, and I don't know if, did everybody understand what, which is, Steve, you just walked in, that this meeting will be videotaped and recorded? Okay. Did anybody have any questions on that? Okay, moving on, pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, reading of the notice of meeting and certificate as to service of all the notices. Already done, I knew that. Okay, new business, interview candidate for position of executive director, which would be Jeffrey Driscoll. And would like to get started on that?
My only concern with being seated here is that my back is.
Wherever you're comfortable.
Would you like to?
That's okay.
If you can't hear me,
We can
please,
switch it if you
please,
like.
if you can't hear me, just.
I mean, I can get closer to Barbara.
Oh, Bob, you know what to do.
Slide over.
It's every man's wish.
You may not want to get closer to me.
How's that? That okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Who's that lady over there on the left?
She's riding with me.
Is your wife talk?
Yes, it is my.
We have a number of questions and we've already through short stories to see who's gonna ask the first, second, third, fourth, and all that. So Georgiana is gonna start off with the first question 1 and question 1A.
Mr. Driscoll? Mr. Chairman? Mr. Driscoll, please tell us about yourself, and in particular, how your experience and training qualifies you to help the MHA meet the challenges described in the profile.
Certainly. My experience is that I am presently and have been counsel for this housing authority since 2009. I think that with my assistance, the housing authority has provided effective and efficient governance insofar as the board administration and management as far as the staff is concerned. But my background begins a number of years ago when I first worked in the city of Fall River for a housing discrimination board, and I was the coordinator of that. From there, I became the assistant executive director of Massachusetts NARO, which is an organization which provides representation to community development agencies and community redevelopment agencies and public housing authorities throughout Massachusetts. I became the assistant executive director at the Barnstable Housing Authority back in the 80s. Became their interim executive director, and from there became the executive director of the Taunton Housing Authority. When I was at the Taunton Housing Authority, when I went in there, it was rated as the worst housing authority in New England and one of the worst housing authorities in the nation. Within 2 years, I took that from that status to that of being an excellent performer. I worked there for a total of 8 years. Left there when I was offered a position as a director of special projects at PVD Properties, and I worked at PVD Properties for a year. And at that point, I realized that I was too distanced from the residents. I didn't have any contact with the residents whatsoever. I had done some consulting at that point in time, in particular for a number of housing authorities, and I decided to open up my own law practice because I went to law school while I was an executive director in Barnstable and the executive director in Taunton. Prior to that, I had gotten my master's in public administration from Suffolk University Graduate School of Management. So the law background, the MPHA, the administrative background has boded very well for me in dealing in the public sector. After I left PVD Properties, I opened up my own law practice, of which my son, that was in 2001, my son joined me in 2012. And we now represent more public housing authorities in Massachusetts than any other 10 firms combined. It's been an experience for me that's been very positive. It's provided me the opportunity to see how housing authorities function and how they work. At the same time, I have been teaching public housing officials, in particular commissioners and executive directors, about their roles and responsibilities. And I teach for Massachusetts NARO. I started their certification program with them. I teach for Rutgers University in their program, the Center for Government Services. I teach public housing officials in New Jersey, in particular law. I've also taught strategic planning for them. I also teach for the Public Housing Authority Directors Association. These are usually at conferences. The trainings for rectors are usually on Saturdays. I've taught around the country through the Public Housing Authority Directors Association and National NARO, and it's strictly for Public Housing Authority executive directors and commissioners. I have, since, like I said, 2012, my son has been involved in my practice. We're at a point in time where Jonathan is ready to take over that practice, and I'm looking to come here to be the full-time executive director, and Jonathan will be handling all of our business. I may still be listed as of counsel, but I will not be functioning in that capacity as I am now. And I would be full-time executive director, able to devote my time to this housing authority. I've not applied for any other position. This is the only one that I've applied for because I feel that I can make a significant difference here at the housing authority. I know the residents, I know the staff, I am familiar with the Board of Commissioners. I think that we would make an effective team to be able to address the needs of the authority. And I am familiar with the authority. I'm familiar with the good and I'm familiar with that which I think can be improved upon.
Good. Well, you answered the follow-up question about what about the MHA executive director job has drawn your interest. So if you don't have any further elaboration, we can move on to the next question.
I'd like to address that.
Okay.
When and Michael, no reflection upon you as an attorney, but when would an attorney stop or not take the opportunity to speak when they're asked a question, even if they've already answered it? I think Medford's unique, and that's why we represent between 40 and 50 housing authorities. I've had opportunities in the past to apply. I had an opportunity a few years ago to apply, and I chose not to. But I think this is a unique opportunity, this housing authority. I think there's a lot of positive with the city of Medford, and in particular with this housing authority. I'm not as familiar with the city of Medford as I am the authority, but there are a lot of good things that I think this authority can do going forward. I want to be part of that, and I think I can facilitate that, in particular with the services to the residents.
Good. The Medford Housing Authority Board now has 2 long-term members and 3 relatively new members. What can you bring to the MHA board that can help the board take a comprehensive view of the MHA and generate broadly supported policies that will help move the MHA forward and serve its residents?
Well, that's a great question. I don't look at the members of the Board of Commissioners as long-term or new commissioners. I look at the Board of Commissioners as 5 individuals who hopefully are coming from 5 different directions, who come together and meet and then exit in all one direction. And it is the responsibility of the executive director to facilitate that. Now, not all the time are board members going to agree, but the issue is that once the board makes a decision, whether that's 3-2 or 4-1 or 5-0, when you walk out of this room, you're walking out with the thought that you're doing the best for the housing authority. And if there's a question either legally or ethically, then that's something that needs to be addressed possibly either by the Housing Authorities Council, by the Ethics Commission, by getting a determination. But only to question as far as whether or not the Housing Authority can go forward. It's the board's responsibility to do what's in the best interest of the authority, and that's determined by 3 out of 5 members, not 5 members, but by 3 out of 5. So the board has to work cooperatively. The board has to have a short memory also, because if there was a discussion and disagreement at the previous meeting, and that was resolved, that can't be carried over from meeting to meeting to meeting. You have to make the determination, and what the board's determination is, as I said, in the best interest of the authority, and then move on to the next issue. Can't dwell on previous issues. And I don't know that this board is, and I'm not making any representations that that's the case, but every board has to understand that they've got to move on. You can't be stuck in mud.
Good, thank you.
Okay, next question is from Rosa.
Thank you, Jeff, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Operating housing authority is a complex task. Residents expect a high level of service, and regulatory agencies expect the housing authority to comply with complex regulations. What in your background specifically can provide evidence that you have the experience to serve as executive director here in Medford?
Oh, thank you. When I went into the Taunton Housing Authority, as I said, it was rated as one of the worst housing authorities in the nation. HUD had actually called me and asked me when they heard that I had applied for the position, asked me if I had a death wish. They then proceeded to meet with me prior to my executing my contract with them, and they provided me with a 3/4 inch thick report that had 57 findings. At my first meeting that I was at, one of the commissioners made a motion to set up a committee to address those 57 findings. And I stopped them and I said, you know what, that's my responsibility. That's my responsibility to address those findings. And we took one by one, myself, my staff had difficulties. They weren't sufficiently trained. I had them either get training or I led the way for them. But as I said, we went from being a very poor performer to one that was almost taken over by the state because of its previous performance, to one that was considered to be an excellent performer. On a scale of 1 to 100, our FEMAP score, Public Housing Management Assessment score, was, before I got there, 43.7, I believe, something like that. Within a matter of just a few years, it was 99. So that, I think that gives me the experience. The other thing too, though, you mentioned regulations. In my practice, I deal with regulations and statute. The teaching I do reinforces that, so that I can tell you what a specific statute is or what a specific regulation is, whether it be Section 8, whether it be public housing. But that's not what is the only thing that makes up an executive director of a housing authority. I have a master's in public administration. I have quite a bit of experience. I've done labor negotiations. I've represented housing authorities in dealing with labor issues. I'm not a labor attorney though, and I don't profess to be, but I am familiar with that, and I do understand that you have to have an individual sitting in the position of executive director who knows more than just housing, and you have to have someone who can be a leader, someone who can direct people, And sometimes that direction is just providing them with a way to get somewhere. In other cases, it's a little bit of a shove. In other cases, it's a push. And it depends on each individual. But if I were the executive director of this housing authority, my standard would be that individual would be professional, deal with the residents with respect, deal with the community with respect, and quite frankly, make the Medford Housing Authority be the envy of the city of Medford.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
I guess I get the next one, Jeff. The Medford Housing Authority is a complex organization, and we are fortunate to have some skilled personnel at all levels. What is your management style in working with managers and staff?
My management style is I believe in management by objectives. Whether that's clearly stated or whether it is understood. And what do I mean by that is that the authority has to have goals. What is the authority looking to accomplish? What is the board looking for the housing authority to accomplish? And then we break that down by department. And we attempt to develop objectives to be able to reach that goal. And every employee has to have we have to have an expectation of every employee, and every employee has to have an expectation of what it is that they're going to do. By setting out objectives, then it clearly defines quantifiably and with direction as far as what's expected of the staff. And regardless of what level you're at, there's a level of expectation. The expectation increases as you go up the corporate ladder, if you would, simply because the responsibility increases. But definitely by identifying to the staff what's expected of them, and then evaluating them based upon that. And not evaluating them with a snapshot. I don't believe in August 1st everyone having an evaluation, even though formally that would happen. What I believe in is making sure there's input throughout the year, so no one's surprised. Why should we wait 12 months when someone's not doing their job? You have to constantly evaluate, and maybe the better word is to oversee. The managers have to oversee the work of their employees. But it's a constant. It's a constant.
I have a possible follow-up to that question, but it doesn't pertain to what I have written here, so I have to change it a little bit. And this is serious, that we're gonna have complete transparency.
Sure.
So, I received a call from somebody that said, well, you know, Jeff, he maybe wants to be anonymous, so I'm gonna let you answer it rather than sit on it and believe it if it's true or not, or whatever. Jeff has 20-something years, 25 years or so as an employee of Housing Authority. What if he's taken the job for the next 2 years, because they have the multiplying factor for what your retirement's gonna be, rolled up mostly in the last 2 years of your employment. So are you taking this job for 3 years and then all of a sudden the multiplying factor doubles your retirement or whatever it does?
Absolutely not. If the board wants to enter into negotiation with me for a contract beyond 3 years, I'd be more than happy to do that. Absolutely not. I am, like I said, I'm extraordinarily satisfied in where I am right now. I am actually going to take a pay cut in working here. That having been said, as I said earlier, and not anticipating that question at all, I've not applied anywhere else. Last time I think I applied for a position outside of my practice might have been 2002. I've had ample opportunity to. I've had ample opportunity with a good number of my clients. I had a job offer the day after I had my interview with the selection committee, which would have paid me significantly more than the Medford Housing Authority, and I chose not to even consider that. So that the answer to that is unequivocally no.
And the one thing I think most of us have questions, I know I do, would you be representing us in some legal issues? Would you also, and would Jeff Driscoll and Driscoll remain law firm?
Right, no, Driscoll and Driscoll would not remain your law firm, and they would not be able to, and I've already cleared that with the State Ethics Commission. That's not something that would be possible. I actually conferred with them prior to submitting an application as far as what type of participation Driscoll and Driscoll could have while this process was going on. My anticipation is that, yes, I would oversee that as the executive director. Wouldn't have anything to do with Driscoll and Driscoll. And I certainly would wanna talk to the board about that further, if it were that you were to select me. I would certainly wanna do
So
that.
if the legal issue, you had to go over, file an eviction notice, you would do the legal.
I would wanna talk to the board about that. My
Okay.
anticipation is that that would be within the purview of my responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that would result in a considerable saving to the housing authority.
Can May I ask
Sure.
a question?
Yeah, please ask it.
We had an attorney, executive director for 25 years at least, and a lot of things were overlooked, as I found out later, that should have been acted on. And I know since you've been here, Jeff, and I'm not blowing smoke, but you've increased what an attorney should do for the housing authority. I mean, evictions and things were done right in order, where, so the attorney thing sort of, you know, you've been an attorney and a good attorney, and you're gonna give up, you would just do your law work that had to be done here from Medford, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, nothing to do with Somerset and down that area.
Not even anything to do with Somerville up in this area.
Somerville and, about a half a dozen others?
There's between 40 and 50 housing authorities that we represent in one capacity or another.
Oh, so
And Jonathan will be doing that entirely. I won't be doing that. I won't be doing that.
No, I want the board members to know that at one time we had an attorney for many years, and, again, after he left, we found things that should have been done that weren't done. Thank you, Chairman.
If I can just address that?
Sure.
Yeah. I wasn't here back in those days, and I don't know whether or not that individual had done work beyond the housing authority or just for the housing authority. My anticipation is that if there were any legal work that I did, it would be on behalf of this housing authority and not some other housing authority. Other than my wife, the first person I spoke to was my son, to make a determination as far as whether or not this would be possible. He's young, he's upcoming, and he's much more ambitious than am I. I think it has everything to do with his being in the law for approximately 5 years, my being in the law for almost 25 years. So that he has all sorts of ideas as far as where he wants to take the practice. My name will still be on the letterhead, but I will not be representing other housing authorities. I will be representing this housing authority. Just, Bill, to just elaborate on your question, I need to discuss with the board how you would want me to handle that, because quite frankly, I think with my experience in dealing with this housing authority, I would be reluctant to have someone else come in here and do that. I would think that, and I don't know this for certain, but I would think that based upon my previous experience as an executive director, that's something certainly within the purview of my responsibilities. Of course, there would be staff that would be expected to raise the standard, and I think they should. There's ideas that I have that I would certainly be willing to institute and put into practice so that it would make it more effective and more efficient. And I think it would be extraordinarily beneficial. I would be able to have my thumb on what's going on. At this point in time, the problem with having an outside counsel is you react, and I would like to be proactive.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question, one quick question on that. Like most housing authorities, money is tight at the Medford Housing Authority. What in your experience provides evidence that you can play a leadership role in the financial planning process? The process the board believes is essential to maintaining its service and delivery. And I'll add a little more to that, since we had an election this November, we have a new president of the United States who's talking about cutting billions of dollars out of housing. If you could tell us a little about that.
Sure. I've had the unique experience that when I worked for Massachusetts NARO, I worked in conjunction with 241 housing authorities. I would see people at conferences or at training sessions, and I'd say, wow, that person really knows what they're doing. Little did I know they didn't. And in the years since then, I have been fortunate to be able to see the inner workings of many housing authorities. And I'm more familiar than most as far as what's going to work and what's not going to work. I know that here you've undergone some reorganizations on a number of occasions. I know there's concern with finance. I've seen that at numerous housing authorities. But we're not reinventing the wheel. And that I'm familiar with dealing with housing authority finance. For 10 years I spent as a member of the Advisory and Finance Committee in Somerset. I work hand in hand with my fee accountants, both in Barnstable and then in particular in Taunton. These Taunton had significant issues with finances when I first got there. It's a business, and you run it like a business. The difficulty is, though, that we're dealing with a population that may need increased services that may not be cost effective. And so we have to find a way to provide those services. And if that means we rely more upon the community, then you rely more upon the community. The bottom line, though, is that there has to be a plan on how to go forward. That's where the board comes in. That's where I would come in as executive director. And we would identify what the needs are, we'd identify what the costs are for that, and we'd go forward. One of the first things that I would be looking to do is to find out whether or not there were any analysis done as far as what the needs of the authority. What are the structural needs? What are the physical needs? What's the financial picture look like? If you were to select me and we were able to enter into a contract, one of the first things I would do would be to contact Barbara Vivian and ask her for about 100 documents, Barbara, including minutes and financial reports and budgets and things such as that, so that I would have a head start on what's necessary. It's a matter of planning. One of the classes that I teach, in fact I taught it just the other day, is contract administration and procurement. And I don't teach people how to write an RFP or an IFP, or an RFP. But what I teach them is how to manage procurement, how to manage contracts. And it's oversight, it's management. It goes back to my training at Suffolk University, in conjunction with the experience I have as a lawyer dealing with numerous housing authorities. It's about planning, and the planning starts with the board and the executive director. The executive director providing recommendations to the board deciding how to proceed forward. And it matters not whether that's maintenance, it matters not whether it's negotiations, it matters not whether it's fiscal, it's a management approach. It's a management approach. Nothing can happen by chance. Nothing can happen by chance, because when that happens, as I said earlier, that's when we react. We need to be proactive, and we need to push the envelope. And this board needs to do that.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving right along here to Georgiana, question number 5, Georgiana.
Yes. At the MHA, some of the staff is unionized and some of it is not. Also, the MHA does not have a highly developed human resources system. What in your experience prepares you for developing an improved HR system one that will both support and hold employees accountable?
Since 2001, I'm supposed to hesitate. Okay, listen to the question. Okay, now answer. Okay. Since 2001, I've taught personnel through Rutgers University and the Public Housing Authority Directors Association. I teach executive directors, primarily executive directors from across the country, Guam, Puerto Rico, who come to take my class in the FADA certification program. I think that qualifies me in having dealt with housing authorities that have 69 units and housing authorities that have 13,000 units, and addressing those concerns. But beyond that, I have been involved since the late 80s in dealing with policy matters, in particular personnel matters. I've written a number of personnel policies. I deal with personnel issues on almost a daily basis. For the last 16 years, I've been in-house counsel to the Somerville Housing Authority. I have assisted them with their personnel matters. Most of the housing authorities that I deal with the exception of 3, this one being one, Somerville also, do not have or did not have a labor attorney, so that I feel that responsibility, in particular, Georgiana, as far as the personnel policies are concerned, the HR policies. That, like any other policy, needs to evolve. There's a number of ways to ensure that that's the case. Sometimes we do it because we react to a situation, we realize that we didn't have something. I think that the positive in my experience is that I can bring to you things that I may see in your policy that you don't, based upon something that happened at one of my other housing authorities. So I can bring that information to you. Have I reviewed your personnel policy? No, not at all. It's never been presented to me to do that. I respond to what the housing authority requests of me, and there are times when if I know there's an issue, I can alert the housing authority, but something to me, such as a personnel policy, unless I'm brought in to do that, I wouldn't be doing that. And you had a labor attorney up until March 1st. Attorneys don't like to step on each other's toes, so. I saw you winding up my question, that's why I said that.
Yeah, speaking of that, the next question is from Mike Lewis.
I've been
Let's
worried
step on
about
anybody's
this.
toes, Mike.
A housing authority is a direct service organization. Residents make judgments about the leadership based on the services that they receive. What have you done to improve services and the perception of housing authority services?
Okay. Housing authorities are terrible at public relations. We don't have time for that. We're distracted from that. So therefore, we have a very negative image, if you would. I can tell you what I have done in Taunton. I professionalized the approach to the housing authority, which went from the maintenance personnel wearing uniforms to the staff understanding that if there were no residents, they would not have a job and there'd be no housing authority. So that you have to be cognizant that while residents are not always right, the residents always deserve respect. The residents always deserve an answer, whether it's an answer they want or whether an answer they don't want. You're required to provide that. By the same token, we deal with the most frail population in the community. When we're talking about our elderly, we're often talking about health. We're talking about disabled, we're talking about health. We talk about our families, we're talking about economically clear. So we have to provide an opportunity for our residents to feel more comfortable. Is that a matter of bringing in the district attorney to speak to the residents about fraud, the elderly residents about fraud? Is it about providing additional services? The housing authority can't provide it, and there's a need that's out there, and then we have to find a way to do that, and that's where you get involved with the third party. Is there the ability to begin programs that will be of assistance to the residents, whether it be a job assistance training program, which I attempted to do and had just begun when I left Taunton, hiring residents to train physicians within the authority, and then after a year attempting to have them work in the community and then have other residents replace them. We had just begun that when I left Taunton. There's numerous things that can be done, but again, we have to match up what the needs are to what the resources are. The authority doesn't have the resources, and it's incumbent upon the authority to attempt to find that the resources are out there. We can't create them if they're not there. You made reference to the bill to the election that happened in November. We don't know what the budgets are going to look like. It's been heard and rumored that there are going to be changes that are going to be coming down in cuts. We don't know that yet. But the housing authority has to be considered today. It has to consider today what it is that they do, what it is that they're going to do. But one of the things that I felt always something that I was strong at was that we're not going to get any more money regardless. The question is, how much are we going to lose? We're always asked to do more with less. The only way you do that is to be more efficient and more effective. And the word that I always like to stress, and I do this in my trainings, and I do this with my clients, is you have to increase your productivity. How do you increase your productivity? That's what the question is, and that's something that I would be looking at as far as the authority is concerned. And it's not always a matter of having people do more work. Maybe it's having people do more effective and efficient work.
Okay, thank you.
That's me.
Back to Georgiana.
You kept it on the short straw, I guess, right?
I did. Our residents expect their management to be available and accessible to them. How do you interact with residents, and what concrete actions have you taken in your previous jobs to improve direct services and communication to residents?
I'll go back to my time as executive director in Taunton and Barnstable, because as your lawyer in particular, what I would say to residents is that if I basically know your name That's not necessarily a good thing. So I deal with residents who are in court, not to say that we haven't been able to assist and maintain some of those tendencies, but it's usually a very difficult situation. When I was in Taunton, some of the things that we faced there was that, as one defense attorney told me, he actually was a state representative, told me that 80% of the crime in the city of Taunton took place on 20 acres. Those 20 acres happened to be my properties. We increased the level of services that we got from the police. We took units offline and we put in substations. The Housing Authority paid for a portion of 2 community police officers. I was appointed by the mayor to sit on a committee that hired community police officers from throughout the city of Taunton, in particular my own sites. We worked very cooperatively. Having taken that experience, I, with my clients, have emphasized the need for a liaison with the police, either a police officer or a member of the Housing Authority, an employee of the Housing Authority, being able to coordinate the efforts with the police. Beyond that, there were issues that we were able to address from a physical standpoint to increase safety. There was an ability for us to address things such as putting in playgrounds that the local childcare, one of the local childcare agencies had paid for. Things such as that, bringing in a whole community approach. We're not an island upon ourselves. My philosophy is that I had residents approach me in Taunton, and they wanted a guardhouse. They wanted fencing around the entire development, and I said, you know what, you fence in animals, you don't fence in people. Housing Authority needs to address the concerns that the residents have, and we did that very effectively in Taunton, very effectively. You couldn't walk through my developments in the daytime and feel safe. When I left there, you could walk through at nighttime. And of course, we took care of the physical aspects. We had security, we had police force that were on site, we had increased lighting, we had done landscaping in order to improve the security. We improved the fact that the graffiti was knocked down within 24 hours. We made sure that the dumpsters weren't visible and the trash was picked up. We were very much under a microscope, but the bottom line was that not only did the authority have to do its job, but we impressed upon the residents the need for them to also cooperate with the authority. I had residents who were very willing to go out and be paid to pick up trash. And I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that because I didn't want residents to take trash, throw trash out, and get paid to pick it up. Because it's our responsibility to make sure the trash wasn't there in the first place, and to make sure the residents take their responsibility as far as what the lease is concerned. They operate within the 4 corners of the lease. Doesn't mean we can't try to facilitate things, doesn't mean we can't try to maintain their tenancies, but it's incumbent upon the Housing Authority to provide a level of services. That may vary from authority to authority. Did that answer your question?
It did, and I have a follow-up to that. So what is your day-to-day interaction style with residents?
Okay. At the selection committee, I was asked by one of the residents as far as how I would interact with the residents, how I think the word was introduce myself to the residents. It was always my experience that, and I always thought it was because of me, but maybe it wasn't. I met with the residents often when I was an executive director, both in Taunton and in Barnstable, and I always brought donuts. So I always thought it was me who was the one who was attracting folks, and then I realized on the meetings that I didn't go, that the managers went to, they didn't bring donuts. So I would anticipate that, I would be bringing donuts. My goal was always to be out on site at least once a week, if not more. Not always could I do that based upon meetings and other concerns that may have arisen. But I will guarantee you, if I'm executive director, the residents, while I may not know everyone's name, the residents will know my name, and they will certainly know me by sight, because I will be out on site. I'm out on site not only for the purposes of being there for the residents to see me, but to interact with the residents, to find out what those concerns are, but also to see what the sites look like, to see how our maintenance personnel are functioning, and I truly believe that your management staff should be out on site more than they are right now. If not and I don't know physically, the developments, and I don't know they would allow this, but to be out on site physically with office hours and interacting more.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I know my name's on any of this paperwork, but we're talking residents and their concerns. And as you well know, there's a no smoking policy, and that's my name, Mike Luongo, no smoking. And it hasn't been enforced in Medford. It has in other cities and towns. I think Somerville's doing a pretty good job at it. And and you made a comment back maybe a year or so ago, when that was brought up, that, well, you don't want to evict people. No, we don't want to evict people. We do not want to do that. But you warn them, you warn them, you warn them, and then it comes to a point that there's no more warnings. What's your thoughts on that?
Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock in Dedham District Court, I evicted someone for not smoking, for smoking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, you answer my question.
Can I elaborate? Can I elaborate?
Go ahead, by all means.
I think
You
you're
opened the door, Mike.
Yeah, that's right.
All right,
Thank you.
You people don't want to listen. I love it.
Your Honor, you opened the door.
I love it. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay. Not to be taken out of context, but if I recall correctly, the discussion that we had where I indicated that you don't want to evict people.
Right.
You have a process through which you give individuals an opportunity. It's fairly clear as far as what that process is. We have, at this housing authority, had a process through which we deal with folks, for example, not smoking, but who don't pay their rent. And we give them an opportunity also. It's not as clearly delineated because it's not a policy, but it's been a process through which we've been very successful in attempting to maintain tenancies. We also have, through that process, someone who is not paying their rent, who's dealing drugs. We don't enter into an agreement for judgment. We don't want to maintain that tenancy because there's an obligation on the part of the housing authority to ensure the safety of the other residents. If we evict that person and they owe $72 worth of rent and they're a drug dealer, I have no problem with that. If they have $7,200 that they owe, hopefully not, but and they're a drug dealer, we would evict them also. When someone is a smoker, we go through a similar process. In the case this Thursday, it dealt with a housing authority that had worked with the resident, had provided cessation programs and assistance. And the issue there was, and the judge came out, and the judge was adamant. The judge was adamant, and the individual was represented by legal services. She was extraordinarily sympathetic. But what I had with me were residents who were physically impacted by this other woman smoking, and who had health issues which were directly linked to this woman smoking over the course of 9 years. Housing Authority only had this policy for maybe the last year and a half or 2 years. And my son Jonathan, in the fall, had entered into an agreement for judgment with this woman to give her another shot beyond that which was in the policy. I think the policy was 4 strikes and you're out, basically. This woman got at least a 5th, if not a 6th, and just continued to breach it to the point where it was negatively impacting the other residents. So is it incumbent upon the housing authority to try to maintain tenancies? I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's rent. I don't care if it is smoking. Yeah, we've got to try to maintain tenancies because our residents oftentimes don't have some other place to go. If they do, it's usually with family or in a situation that's not as positive as living here. So yeah, it is incumbent on the authority to try to maintain those, but it gets to a point where we have to be concerned with the macro instead of just the micro. We have to be concerned with the developments as a whole. And I think some of you who have dealt with me in dealing with residents, we've evicted people that maybe the housing authority didn't want to evict, but knew they had to based upon the negative impact that it had in the neighborhood or in the building. Not every resident who is evicted is a bad person or a bad family, but there was justifiable reason that not only the housing authority believed, but the court believed was necessary. And oftentimes, quite frankly, the standard that the authority uses is much higher than the standard that the court uses. The housing authority will oversee things and will determine, is this something that we want to evict someone simply because there was a breach of the lease? There may be some other reasonable accommodation. There may be some other issue, whether it's dealing with VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, There's numerous things that we need to take into consideration. And when it comes to smoking, that certainly is the case.
What if I may, people living in family developments or the senior developments that shouldn't be there, that for a fact we know, or maybe even you know, because we've talked about this in the past, that shouldn't be there because they just got out of prison, and everybody deserves a second chance, third chance, but, how do you go about getting those people out? First of all, they shouldn't be there. Like, say, the drug, drugs are out. No 1, 2, 3 warning. And again, you and I discussed that back maybe a couple of years ago. And the person is still around. What do you do, Jeff? How do you?
Once the housing authority is aware that someone's there, then it's responsibility of the housing authority to ensure that that person is removed. It gets to a point where is there sufficient evidence to show that that person is there? What I would strongly recommend, and something that I would be involved with, is a closer working relationship with the city's police department. I think that I have seen great successes with the housing authorities that we deal with increased security measures. We, in fact, at this housing authority, back over the years, I'm dating myself. I'll wait. That's okay. I'll wait.
well,
I'll wait.
William?
Thanks, Bill.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I tried to take the wrapper off, but it stopped.
Okay, sit down.
It turned the place upside down, I didn't mean to do that.
I think with increased efforts, you can identify people who are not supposed to be there, whether that's on paper, for example, through the police department. Mike, I don't know if you deal with this in the BHA, but there's issues that we always come forth with, where people say, when we say to them, look, you have an unauthorized occupant, we want that person out of here. We either trespass them off, or we get a restraining order against them, and then inevitably they say, well, you know what, there's 10 other people who are living here who shouldn't be here. And I always say, well, tell me who they are, and they say, well, I don't want to tell you. So if the housing authority knows that there's someone here who's been here for 2 years and is still here, as your attorney, I'm not aware of that, because if I were, then we would begin efforts to remove them. What I would, as we're saying, I think just a moment ago, what I would want to see is increased communication between the housing authority and the police, the housing authority and the school department. I think the housing authority can take efforts to increase the level of security. Back a number of years ago, I'm going to take that without back a number of years ago, we were very successful in not removing the resident. There was an issue with a one-man crime wave, as I described him, but we were very successful in removing this individual from the development. We worked in cooperation with the police, who had acted on the housing authority's trespass order against this person. We had evidence from a security camera that was located both at the front and back door of this residence, in the general area of the back door and front door of this resident. And we were able to get this person, who was extraordinarily undesirable, off of the developments. I'm going to guess, Mike, and say that was probably about 6 years ago. So can it be done? Sure, it can be done. Do you need a concerted effort to do it and a coordinated effort to do it? You do. And if I can go back to a question earlier, Georgiana, that you posed to me. Why do I want to do this? That's why I want to do this. That's why I want to do it. I think that there are things that we can do here that, with my assistance, we can make a positive impact. Now, I'm not going to turn the world around. I don't want you to have that expectation. But my success in time was based upon being a team builder. And the employees didn't work for me, they worked with me. And I worked with the board, and the board was informed as far as what it was that we were doing. One time I didn't inform the board, and it was when we brought in an undercover agent, and his life was in jeopardy if the information got out. One police officer, my tennis selector, and myself were aware of this individual. The result after 3 months were 41 arrests in the city of Taunton, 15 on my sites. The board was aware that, the chairperson was aware that we were undertaking this effort also, but the board was not aware. Only because someone's life was in jeopardy if that was found out. And this person actually lived in our developments.
Thank you.
No, thank you. The next, you done, Judge? Did I answer your question? Okay. The next question is gonna be by Commissioner Lewis, but in the essence of time, we only allowed an hour for the previous meeting, so we're gonna ask for a little more brief
Okay.
answers, okay? Just to
We
get all the questions.
started at 5:06.
And
I thought it was, I was gonna say 10 past
It was
five.
more 10 past. I think it bordered on 25 past, Bill.
I just don't, I don't wanna, I run out of time, we're gonna get a bunch we wanna hit you with. So,
And we also had additional questions asked that were not part of the questions.
yeah, that was my
Just be
fault, but it's a
mindful of
question
that.
I had asked.
So we should allow a few more minutes.
You could have as many more minutes as Georgina
You're
wants to
welcome.
give you.
Okay.
There's no end to it.
Be as brief as, thorough but brief.
More succinct.
That's right. Boards are often not unanimous in the direction the housing authority should take. How do you manage in a context where there's a majority on the issue, but nevertheless there's a strong minority view as well?
It's pretty simple. The majority rules. If there's a question that an individual has that's strong in the minority side, and you're dealing with something, whether it's lawful or whether it's ethical, that individual should raise that question after the vote, ask for, either ask for revote based upon that, or ask for authorization to seek legal opinion, authorization to seek the accountant's opinion, whatever the matter may be, ask authorization by virtue of a vote of the board to get a clarification from DHCD or HUD. That individual is not authorized to go out on their own to do something, because the board, not one of you is empowered individually, you're empowered collectively. So based upon a vote of the board, then you can go forward. If that minority vote, that 4-1 vote or 3-2 vote, if they feel strongly, or one individual feels strongly, then it's up to them to get the board to authorize that individual to proceed forward in another way to get additional information. The other aspect of that is that the other aspect of that is that if there's a necessity for additional information, in my teaching, I tell folks that you never vote unless you have enough information to be able to hang your hat on. And once you have enough information to hang your hat on, once you have enough information to make a determination that you feel comfortable with and you've performed your due diligence, then you can make that decision. If not, then it could be the request of the board to continue it to the next board meeting. But, as I said earlier, once that decision is made, and that's a decision of the Housing Authority, we need to go forward on that and work cooperatively, not in any way in conflict. If there are 10 issues on the table, and you agree on 8 of them, that's great. You don't agree on 2 of them, you discuss those, and then you still move forward, just like you would on the first 8. Okay? That's about as succinct as I can get, I'm sorry.
On the next page, I believe it's Georgiana.
Describe your knowledge of federal capital funding, the timing of appropriations, spending, and the penalty for failing to complete per HUD's deadline.
Okay, well, if you don't complete per HUD's deadline, if you don't commit the funding, you lose the funding, that's pretty clear. And that's not something that would happen here. I know that in the past that you've had, I think in one instance you had a procurement officer. You also had, you've had instances where I think Mr. Coddington was serving as your procurement officer, and you've gone out and sought others without success. When I was in Barnstable, I was the assistant executive director and then the director. Within a 2-year period of time, we did $48 million worth of construction. That was at a time where there was a tax-exempt local lending to encourage rental production. We partnered with a number of private developers. We also increased the number of units within the auspice of the administration of the Housing Authority. When I was in Taunton, we had the second largest award for modernization. It was competitive basis. We had the second largest award of any housing authority other than Boston Housing Authority. But, we always felt like we had the most, because Boston Housing Authority is in another universe. I believe that was someplace around $8 million, which was unheard of at that point in time, and that was for modernization. We were successful in administering that. When I have been at the Somerville Housing Authority, if some of you are familiar with Cape and Court, I participated not directly, but indirectly with that as counsel, as legal counsel, to assist them in the construction of that. Cape and Court is 92 units. primarily elderly / disabled housing. The Housing Authority there owns 0.1% of that. They have a management contract with, I believe it's Boston Capital, where the investors own 99.99% of that. It's a ground lease that I would have drafted and worked with Boston Capital on that. And then the Housing Authority has a management agreement to run that facility. It's a beautiful facility. That was on a site that had decrepit old units that were state-funded units. Medford Housing Authority cooperated with that and provided some of the Section 8 vouchers for the individuals who reside there. The Section 8 vouchers back up the units that are there, both from Medford and from Somerville. Once the individual picks up and leaves, they take their voucher with them. So that, I'm familiar with that. I have not participated on a hands-on basis with federal procurement, I'll tell you that right now. Do I find that to be difficult? Not at all. That's not an issue that I feel that I'm gonna have. I do understand the responsibilities of dealing with HUD. When I went into Taunton, HUD indicated that the Housing Authority owed them $600,000. After I met with HUD, this was from a construction / modernization fund. When I left from HUD, there were 8 of them and 1 of me. I indicated to them the numbers weren't fair, and they said, but we have to have all 8 people here. And I said, no, I think you need to have more people here, because it's not fair with you guys. I walked away with $1 million. I walked away with $1 million. So, is that an area that I'm familiar with? Yes. Have I done that hands-on? No. Will I have to do that hands-on here? I think at some point, yes, possibly. And I have no problem with that at all, because I'm familiar with the process. And I've done it, I participated in that based on an oversight. But I understand that's a significant responsibility, and I have no qualms in being able to address that.
I guess I'm next. Mr. Driscoll, describe your strategy for using capital versus operating funds for optimizing an agency's procurement policy.
I think I addressed that a few minutes ago, saying that there would need to be, and if there hasn't been, there needs to be an analysis of what the needs of the authority are. Everything that we undertake has to be done in a planned version, and if it is through the use of capital funds, then we would be able to address that, and it would be at the direction of the board when we take into consideration not only what the physical needs are, but what the input is from the residents and from the maintenance personnel here at the Housing Authority. As far as dealing with administrative funds, you said, is that how you call it, administrative funds, Mike?
Yeah.
Operating funds. Operating funds, okay. Operating funds. Ongoing expenses within the context of a budget. The budget is a planning document. Can I use that word? That budget is developed anywhere from 5 to 6 months before the beginning of the fiscal year. There's input from as many sources as possible, some that I just mentioned, employees, residents, and the board, along with any other resources that we have, i.e. looking at maintenance trends and work order trends. But that operational budget is to take you through on an annual process or an annual basis to determine what your needs are. Do your needs change 6 months in? Possibly. When I was in college, I worked as an intern in the city of Fall River, and we had what was called an allotment system. I brought that forward, or that idea forward with me when I was in Taunton. What I see housing authorities do is they oftentimes expend in their budget a higher percentage of funds towards the end of the fiscal year. And my problem with that is that